So today we're very excited to start off our presentations with Brian Eshenaur. He is a senior extension associate with the New York State IPM program, and he is also a spotted lanternfly expert. And so today he's going to be giving us a timely update on spotted lanternfly and some things you need to know for this time of year. So go ahead, Brian.
Thanks, Amara. Yeah, so here it is, spotted lanternfly. You've probably heard about it, and I know some of you have firsthand experience with it. I see some people from New York City on there. So let's talk about spotted lanternfly. In today's short presentation, I'm going to give a little bit of background, really focus on what's happening right now at this time of year, talk about the current distribution, the impact that it'll have on plants, different kinds of plants, and what we can do and what not to do as well. So spotted lanternfly, as you may have heard, is an invasive plant hopper. It kind of looks like a moth and it has fly in the name, but it's a plant hopper, and that's important because it feeds by a method where it puts in its proboscis and removes sap from the plant, simply. And it is native to Asia. It was introduced here probably in 2012, but it was recognized in 2014 in September there. And it has, sadly, even though there's been a lot of efforts to manage it, it has been spreading since. But some of those management efforts and quarantines apparently have slowed the spread, and we continue to want to do that, to not have it spread any quicker than it will on its own. And it does feed on over 100 different plant species, so it's pretty opportunistic. It does have its favorites, however, and they include the tree of heaven. It's #1 favorite host plant. In fact, if it has access to the tree of heaven, and this is a weedy species that is in urban areas, it's in rural areas, it's one of the first to pop up on a vacant lot. If spotted lanternfly has access to this, it can lay 7 times the number of eggs, and it can lay those egg masses earlier in the fall. And because it's waiting till the fall to lay its eggs, frost could cut it off. So this is an important plant, and there is a close relationship there. But it can also feed on black walnuts, willows, silver and red maples, and grapes. We're really concerned about that because it has killed grapes in some settings in Pennsylvania. We feel we're prepared for it now, and they're not losing grapes, but it is something that any grape grower will have to watch for. So here are the spotted lanternfly egg masses. This is what you can see at this time of year. The egg masses are just beginning to hatch right now in urban areas where there are heat islands. We're seeing this in several locations, including New York City, Philadelphia area. And a couple of years ago, I took this picture of an egg mass just as they were beginning to hatch. They actually come out as white, they turn to gray, and then they just move away from that egg mass, and they'll start to feed as soon as possible. They'll feed on just about anything, weedy species, not trees, not tree trunks at the beginning, and they're often not very noticeable. We don't see them really until they become adults. These young instars can hide pretty well. So as I mentioned, they're just starting to hatch now in some of our urban areas, and they're working their way through their instars. They'll do that until about July, maybe around the middle of July, we'll see them become adults. A slit will develop on the backside of this 4th instar that has this red coloration, and the adult will come out, and they can be around from that mid-July period to December. Whenever there's a hard freeze is when the spotted lanternflies will die. And they start laying their eggs in September, and the cycle begins or continues. So this is a map of where they are right now. New York State IPM program maintains this map, and they can be found. You can see from the area where they first started in Pennsylvania, they've moved out from there. There's evidence that they're following rail lines and highways. And so we have this east to west distribution. And in fact, these locations in Ohio are along rail lines. And the ones that were found in Syracuse and Buffalo just last year were also there. But people have the opportunity to move them as well. Just a little closer up look in New York. I know we have a lot of New York viewers here, and these dots represent individual finds, but the blue indicates that spotted lanternfly is in that location, and there's a breeding population there. And just because a county is colored in doesn't mean that it's fully infested. This gives us more of an indication of how widely they are distributed. And right now, we want everyone, if they see it, to report it if you're outside of one of those areas. So if you're north of maybe the mid part of the Hudson Valley, please send in any reports. Our New York State Ag and Markets is working to manage those. And even if you're outside of New York State, you can use this reporting link, and those will get to the correct location. And the link is simple, reportslf.com. You'll go to that New York reporting site. You'll be asked to put in photos and give your contact information as well as the location they were found. All right, so what do you do if you find spotted lanternfly on a tree and they're in your yard? You might first notice some honeydew or sooty mold, and that's a sticky material that is exuded from the spotted lanternfly's body. And the sooty mold is a mold that grows on top of that. This is actually my brother's tree and his truck in the back. He noticed during the late summer some specks that were there, some shiny spots that were due to the honeydew that was kind of raining down on his truck. Fortunately, it doesn't, it's just a sugary water, and that washes right off. So we don't want to panic if we see these. In fact, this was in the fall of 2021 when this tree looked like that. And there is no implication to the tree at all. In the spring of last year, the tree was just fine, no dieback at all. They did remove sap, but trees have a big reserve and they can handle that loss of sap in the end of the season. But I've mentioned this before, my sister-in-law posted this picture in the middle on Facebook and got a lot of advice. So some of the advice that came back are things that we don't recommend. So don't use a blowtorch or a highway flare, as some people recommended. There are safe ways to handle this. And as I mentioned, it's not going to harm the tree. You could take a hose and just dislodge them there if you know their presence there is bothering you, and if they're exuding honeydew that's causing sooty mold on things that are below. Also, you may see, because they are producing this honeydew, more yellow jackets and honeybees around there. They're attracted to those materials. And so that is something to be aware of, that they can be a nuisance or potentially a hazard, even though the spotted lanternfly themselves are not. There are traps that can be useful. If this is a real nuisance for you on a consistent basis, you might want to consider a circle trap. You can see one here, and this photo was taken from the inside. It funnels the spotted lanternfly as they're crawling to go upwards. They end up in a bag that is in the top, and they continue to try to go up, and yeah, they are trapped there. And these, in areas where spotted lanternfly are prevalent, can capture a lot, not only the adults, but also the early instars that can only crawl. And so now is the time of year to install those if you would like to remove some of them that are found on your own property. Also, would like to remind people, if you are in an area where there are a lot of spotted lanternfly, be aware that you could potentially be moving their egg masses. Here is a camp chair where there are spotted lanternfly egg masses. If that chair was brought to a new location, perhaps out of state, where there isn't spotted lanternfly, all of a sudden we could have a new population occur there. So something really to be aware of inspecting vehicles. Another reason not to move firewood. Also any equipment that might be moved to a new area if you are living in an area that has spotted lanternfly. We also like to remind people that spotted lanternfly don't bite, they don't sting, and they're not going to survive in the house for very long. We did a study and found that just over 2 days is all they can survive at room temperature without feeding on, as an adult, feeding on a tree. So we don't have to worry about them being a nuisance insect. Just a little bit of hope for the future. There are some biological controls that are occurring naturally out there, and there's some research underway to look at these. And we might see some of that kind of control happening in the future on its own as the populations build up with natural epidemics of these fungi, and potentially their use as sprays. Also, there are predator insects that seem to be building up in areas that have a lot of spotted lanternfly, and that includes praying mantis, some spiders, and other insects. And some birds are learning how to feed on them as well. I will mention that we have a lot of resources at our spotted lanternfly web pages at New York State IPM, and that includes information on managing them. There are insecticides that can be used on a homeowner level, and we have all of those in a table there. If you click on managing spotted lanternfly, and all of the options that are there, including insecticides, and we maintain that list, updating it as new products become available for homeowner use. And also there will be a list there that includes what commercial applicators can do, as well as vineyard managers. All right. And with that, I will wrap up and would be happy to take some questions.
Yes, thank you so much, Brian. Would you like it if I pulled questions out of the chat for you? Would that be helpful?
That would be helpful. Thank you.
Okay. So the first question is, how high from the ground did you see the spotted lanternfly hatching? And I think they're talking about that video, but maybe a broader question is, how high off the ground are the egg masses that these nymphs are hatching out of?
Excellent question. Yeah, that post that I took the video from was only about 3 or 4 feet tall, but the majority of egg masses, unfortunately, are up above 10 feet tall. I think 80% of them. They did a study where they removed some trees in several areas and counted the number of egg masses, and unfortunately, the majority of them are out of reach. So they're going to be hatching up in the tree canopy, crawling down, looking for vegetative plants to feed on in the early spring.
Okay. Next question in the list is, when you showed the slide with the fungi that were attacking spotted lanternfly, the question is, was Beauveria bassiana one of the fungi that was in that picture?
Let's go back. We can do that. We'll go back to the picture there. Yeah, we have Beauveria right there. There's another fungus that is more obscure that I didn't include here, but yeah, these are common ones that are known to feed on various insects. So Beauveria is one of them that can occur.
Okay. Next question is, I'm in Manhattan with a 13th floor terrace and have seen them climb up the netting that I have to keep pigeons off. Is there something I can use to get rid of them before they hop or fly into my apartment? I'm not familiar with how pigeon netting works. I would
Right.
have thought that like just the screen in the window would keep them off, but I've never used pigeon netting, so I'm not quite sure how that works.
Yeah, maybe it has bigger holes and would allow the adult spotted lanternfly to come into the patio. But yeah, as Mara mentioned, screens will keep them off. We think they might be going to tall buildings because they like to go to the biggest tree or the tallest pole in an area, and that the buildings might mimic that in their tiny spotted lanternfly brains. But often when they're on a building for a while, they will slide down and die because they haven't fed on a tree. So yeah, they're probably not going to be there that long. And exclusion is the best way to go.
Next question is, if you put up a net, where do you take the spotted lanternfly? I'm wondering if perhaps the question is, how do you kill spotted lanternfly if you've caught them? Do you have like what's your best recommendation on how to kill spotted lanternfly if you've caught them in a trap?
Yeah, if you caught them in a trap, they will die on their own because they have to feed constantly. I would just say, if you have them in a jar or something, that you would want to change that because they will decay, and decaying spotted lanternfly does not smell pleasant at all. That's one way to handle it. You can just step on them. We don't like a knee-jerk reaction with any insect you see to step on it, but this one, since it is invasive, it's out of its native range, it's okay. Go ahead and do that, and really help prevent spreading it to new areas.
Okay, I think we might have time for one more question. Has there been any work to see if there are visual cues that attract spotted lanternfly adults to host trees? For example, ailanthus, black walnut, or willow that all have similar appearances?
Great question. For a lot of traps, we have cues that the insects use. So we have attractants that can be used to make those traps more effective. We don't have that yet for spotted lanternfly. There's a lot of research looking at that. One has even shown that certain vibrations, certain wavelengths of sound can be attractive. And they found that from something in an industrial site that was causing a vibration, and the spotted lanternfly were attracted to that piece of metal. So they're following up on that. There's no visual clues that we know of yet to bring them on, other than if it's something tall in an environment, that will generally bring them there. And if you're setting up traps in your own yard, putting them on a tree that we know is attractive, like ailanthus or black walnut, will help you get more spotted lanternfly in that trap.
Okay, thank you so much, Brian. If you want to stop sharing your screen, we'll get the next set of slides up for our IPM minute. So we're excited that Dr. Michael Skvarla has joined us today for our IPM Minute. Michael leads the Insect Identification Laboratory at Penn State University, and we'll be talking today about lookalikes for northern giant hornet, or did I find a northern giant hornet? And I think, spoiler alert, the answer is no. So go right ahead, Michael. We're interested to hear your talk.
Sure. So like was mentioned, I'll be talking about northern giant hornets, and that maybe isn't a name that people have heard before. You've probably heard them called murder hornets, or perhaps even Asian giant hornets. For reasons that I don't have time to get into today, we're getting away from those names, and the new proposed and accepted common name is northern giant hornet. But if you've heard murder hornets, Asian giant hornets, these are all the same thing. Northern giant hornets are native to Asia, a broad swath of Asia, including all of Japan, and were introduced into North America. They were first discovered in 2019 in Washington State in British Columbia, and that's still the only place that they're found. It's a small, like 30 square mile area. We're killing the nests when we find them. And so the short of today's talk is, if you think you've seen a northern giant hornet here in the Eastern North America, no, you didn't. The longer answer is, in the ID lab here at Penn State, especially in 2020, I got 600 or 700 ID requests of what people thought were northern giant hornets, and people were mistaking a lot of different species for northern giant hornets, but primarily were mistaking three species in particular, and those included European hornets, which we do have here, eastern cicada killers, and southern yellow jackets. So I'm going to go through each one of these three and tell you how to distinguish them from northern giant hornets, in case you do think you found one. So European hornets, the species Vespa crabo, is native to Europe and Asia and overlaps with northern giant hornet in lots of places over there. It was introduced into Eastern North America in the 1840s and is now found throughout most of Eastern North America, but particularly here in the Northeast, where it's very common and abundant. So you can distinguish European hornets from northern giant hornets based on the color patterns. So you can see there's a lot of red and black in the head and thorax of European hornets, while the head and thorax of northern giant hornets are yellow and black. And also based on the patterning on the abdomen. So European hornets have this kind of red, black, and then yellow with, I don't know, teardrops or eye drops or something. And the northern giant hornet has this brown and yellow stripe pattern. So they're different when you look at the details. If you really want to look at the head, European hornets have a short space between the back of the eye and the back of the head right here. And northern giant hornets have a big space that is about the width of the eye. So it gives northern giant hornets this kind of forward-facing look. There's also differences in where they nest. So European hornets nest up above the ground. They have aerial nests that are anywhere from 4 to 30 feet above the ground, typically in enclosed spaces like hollow trees. They'll occasionally nest in exposed areas that are under spaces, so like under an eave, like you see here, but they're up. Northern giant hornets, on the other hand, nest in the ground, typically associated with tree roots. So you can see there's this big hole here going into this tree ball, root ball, and here's a northern giant hornet coming out of the hole. They're about the same size. European hornets are only slightly smaller, so size isn't actually a very good way to distinguish them. So we're going to be looking again mostly at color pattern. The next species are eastern cicada killers. This species is native to Eastern North America. Again, we have them commonly and abundantly here in the Northeast. And again, it comes down to color pattern. You can see that the eastern cicada killers don't have that black and yellow stripy pattern on the abdomen. There's no yellow head here. It's mostly black, and just the patterning across them is different. There's also some kind of body shape differences. They're in different families. They're not closely related at all. So the shape of eastern cicada killer abdomens is different. It's kind of long and pointy compared to northern giant hornet, which is kind of more stocky and rounded. You can also see differences in the size of the eyes compared to the head. Both species do nest in the ground, but eastern cicada killers are typically nesting in open, exposed areas. So they really like to nest in people's lawns and in grassy areas. And they're solitary nesters. So each individual female cicada killer builds her own nest that she provisions with cicadas. And they'll typically have this kind of patch of dirt at the entrance of the hole. They do nest kind of socially. So you'll see a bunch of eastern cicada killers in a lawn, but it'll be like this swarm of wasps, each one going to their own hole. Again, compared to northern giant hornets, they're typically nesting in forested settings in association with trees, and they're social wasps. So there's one queen with a lot of workers all going to the same nest. And again, size isn't a very good character because they're about the same size. The last species that was frequently confused for northern giant hornets, at least here in Pennsylvania, were southern yellow jackets. This is another species that is native to Eastern North America. You can see the map here. This map is a little bit more difficult to see. Here's Pennsylvania and New York up here. So southern yellow jackets will get into parts of southern New York, Long Island, New York City. You're not going to get them in a lot of the northern parts of the state, but down here in the south, you'll see them. And it's the queens of southern yellow jackets that have mistaken for northern giant hornets because they're big. The workers are kind of normal yellow jacket size. They're small, but the queens are about twice the size of other yellow jackets that you might see for some really cool natural history reasons that, again, I don't have time for today. How do you distinguish them? Again, it comes down to color. Southern yellow jackets have these two prominent stripes on the thorax that really pop out and are obvious. Northern giant hornets don't have that. And Southern yellow jacket queens have this very kind of orangey yellow abdomen with just a little bit of black that is, again, different from that striped abdomen of northern giant hornets. Size is a good character for these guys, or these girls, I guess. Southern yellow jacket queens are about half the size of northern giant hornets. Time is also kind of useful if you think you've got one of these. All of the ID requests, or most of them that I got for European hornets and southern yellow jackets, you can see here in yellow, were out in May in the spring when the queens are out looking to build new nests. And then the eastern cicada killers were mostly submitted in July and August when that species is more active. There's this really nice graphic from Colorado State that shows northern giant hornet here in the bottom center, and then all of the species that they've got that have been confused for northern giant hornet. And it lets you really compare those color patterns and the size to see if you've got a northern giant hornet or not. So I think I wrapped that up in the 5 minutes I was given. I hope that answers all your questions. And again, they're not here. So if you think you've seen one, it's almost certainly something else. But if you do think you've seen one, send me a photo. I'm happy to look at it because we do want to catch these things if they get moved here before they get established. So I'm happy to look at 10,000 photos of things that aren't northern giant hornet to catch that one that is, in case it is here.
Thank you so much. That was very helpful. The one question I've seen in the chat that we'll take before we sign off is, what is a likely way that a northern giant hornet could end up on the East Coast? Like, what's the most likely way it could be moved?
So northern giant hornets are social wasps, similar to paper wasps. So the only individuals that overwinter are mated queens. And so they overwinter in some protected area and then come out in the spring to build a new nest. And so while that queen's overwintering, if she's in something and that something gets moved and then she emerges in an area, she'll have to build a nest, establish, survive, get workers, have those workers, build the nest up big enough. But if that happens, they could establish here. So it's going to be a queen overwintering in something that emerges and establishes a nest.
Great. Thank you so much. We are at the end of our time. Michael, I might follow up with you to see if I can get the link for that great picture that you mentioned from Colorado State, because folks are asking about that, and we can include that in the YouTube recording. So thank you again to our speakers today, Brian Eshenaur and Michael Skvarla, for this great and timely information. We will have recordings posted probably in about a week or so on our YouTube channel. And I've put the link in the chat. Make sure that you join us for our June What's Bugging You First Friday. We'll be talking about common insects that you find in your garden. So have a great Friday.